Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my Star Trek Top 100, the top 10, numbers 10 through 6 will be featured in this video. Yes, just 5 episodes, and you will probably notice the runtime of this video is very long because I am going to spend a little bit of time on each of these 5 episodes, numbers 10 through 6. So we are in the top 10. So I have a number to throw out here for you. It's a number that has eluded me because I haven't bothered to look it up until now. 695. According to IMDb, that is the total number of episodes in the 5 Legacy Star Trek series in which I am covering in this top 100. 695. Now it's a little different than how I might calculate it because that counts two-parters as individual episodes. So if you count episodes that have the words parts 1 and 2 in it as one, as I do, and as I will do twice in this particular video, if you count it that way, then maybe it's a little less than 695, but I think we can round it up to about 700. So about 700 total episodes are eligible for this top 100. And now we're in the top 10, the top 10 out of that nearly 700 total number of episodes that are eligible for this. Now, I will say once again that the caveat for that is this is the top 10 by my opinion and my opinion alone. So it may not always be the most popular opinion, but I don't care. It is my opinion that actually becomes relevant immediately in this video with my number 10, which I promise you no one else in the known universe would have in their top 10, but I don't care because this is my top 100, my top 10, and here we are. The Star Trek top 10, numbers 10 through 6. So let's do no more jibber jabber, as another channel favorite of mine would say. No more jibber jabber. Let us jump into the top 10 of all of Star Trek with my number 10.
Number 10.
All right, here we are. My number 10 in all of Star Trek, out of all nearly 700 episodes, is one, like I said, that others would not have in their top 10, but it is also why I have it at number 1 as my most underrated episodes in Star Trek. So my number 10 in all of Star Trek, be ready for a shocker. If you know my channel, it's not a shocker, but if you don't know me, maybe it is. My number 10 is from Star Trek Deep Space Nine's 3rd season, Visionary. That is right. Visionary is an absolute top 10 episode for me. And then when I say it's underrated, I don't know a lot of people who say it sucks. Although I did see the Trek Culture a little while back put it in their top 10 worst time travel episodes in which they are just objectively wrong, but that's okay. People have the right to be wrong. It is actually one of the best time travel episodes, not one of the worst. But that's my opinion. In any case, generally, I don't see a lot of hate for this episode. It's just like people think it's okay. It's fine. People generally don't think it's one of the greatest, but for me, it is. And I'm going to talk about why I feel that way about this episode. There are 2 main components to this. Obviously, the time travel. I would have to love the time travel component in order to put it this high, and I will talk a lot about that, but also the character stories. And this is not just a good O'Brien character story, but it also has some sneaky good scenes for pretty much all of the characters and good comedic scenes. This episode has the kind of comedy that I prefer in Deep Space Nine, where it is more subtle comedy that is baked into the stories, baked into the character stories, like little one-liners here and there, rather than the outright slapstick or the bad sitcom tropes from the 80s that Deep Space Nine would often do. rather than just going full on bad sitcom tropes, just these subtle character moments and good comedic exchanges between characters that fit in to a more serious story. And I think that's the kind of comedy that Deep Space Nine is better at, although they would do the other kind of way more often and produce a lot of bad episodes as a result of it. So I'll start with the time travel. So I do appreciate this kind of time travel. I've referred to it as personal time travel. While I have no problem with the, hey, let's go back and stop this big riot from happening that changes the course of history, or let's go back and prevent the Nazis from winning World War II because history has been changed for that to happen. Now we have to correct it. These big world changing or universe changing events. I don't have a problem with that kind of time travel. In fact, when it's done well, it is very, very good. But I do have this affinity toward this more personal time travel when a character is just traveling within their own personal life. One of my favorite novels of all time that also was turned into an underrated television show, The Time Traveler's Wife. It uses that kind of time travel, and I love the use of O'Brien as the main character here. And I love how it kind of builds to him seeing his death. We don't see that like immediately. That's his first jump is just him arguing with Quark. And Bashir even makes a comment if your hallucinations are just, Quark's financial troubles, that you need a better fantasy life, or something along those lines, which is kind of funny. But it just goes to show like how they didn't get right into O'Brien seeing his own death. They kind of work up to it. And so when he does see his own death, it's really chilling. That first scene where you see the dead O'Brien laying on the ground and O'Brien looking at himself dead, such a chilling scene, and a very effective scene to get us in the mood for the story and show us what the stakes are for this. Now, I did hear the complaint, and I think it was from the Trek Culture Top 10 Worst Time Travel list, that the stakes are too ridiculously high at the end with the whole station blowing up. That's a little too much. But in that same video, they cited Cause and Effect as a great time travel episode. And what are the stakes in that one again? Oh, yeah, the Enterprise exploding. So I don't see why that's a problem for the station exploding being the stakes, especially since we do build toward that. We don't just jump right into that. So I think that's why it's really effective. Now, this is, of course, Type 2 time travel. Now, I go by my brother's 3 types of time travels. I know other people have different formats, but Type 1 would be the whatever happens, happened type of time travel. Actually is used in The Time Traveler's Wife. Is used in Lost, the show. Type 2 is the more common one, and is the one typically used by Star Trek, although I get annoyed when they mix their time travel types and they put Type 1 in with Type 2, but they don't do that here. They just stick to Type 2, which is the future can be changed, and thankfully so in this case, because it would be not a great thing if O'Brien was just destined to die over and over again, as we see in Lost, for example, where Desmond says to Charlie, this is Lost spoilers if you've never seen it, but he says, no matter what I do, I can't change it. You're gonna die, Charlie. So he can save Charlie, but eventually fate is going to catch up with him and he's going to die. And that's not the case here. And that's consistent with how time travel works in Star Trek. So that makes total sense. And we're glad that that is the case, because we don't want O'Brien to die. So he is able to change things so that he doesn't die. And I love how he has this chilling interaction with future Bashir, who's doing an autopsy over his dead body, and tells him, "I go tell myself to do this such and such a scan," or whatever. So I love all of that. I think all of that works well. And then there are some weird things that happen that I don't know if it quite works. If maybe the time travel logic is a little weird, such as when O'Brien he goes into the future and sees a station exploding. There's an O'Brien in the shuttlecraft who warns him about what's going to happen, tells him to go back. So then he goes back. He now has this knowledge, but then when he jumps into the future again, he jumps before the station exploding, but it is still the same version of Brian on that station exploding timeline who doesn't have the memory of our O'Brien, who has seen that already. So they're like kind of operating on two different timelines, which I don't know if that works, but okay, I'll go with it. And of course, they just explain it by having the two O'Brien saying together temporal mechanics. And that is something that Janeway does a lot too. And I think it works for me. I'm totally fine with it when they're just like, oh, I'll never understand temporal mechanics. And that like just kind of explains these wonky things that happen sometimes. And I have no issue with it. But then we get this mind-blowing thing where the wrong O'Brien goes back and he has lived a different life and has different memories than everyone else. Now, I alluded to this way back with my number 25 in Deadlock, where something similar happens where the versions of Harry Kim and maybe Naomi from the other Voyager go over, and well, Naomi doesn't have any memories because she's an infant, but Harry Kim has these different set of experiences as a memory, and this is like such a mind-blowing thing. And I said in that entry that, oh, there's another one coming up that's like that, and that's what this is. When the wrong O'Brien goes, I love this shit so much. Like, why do people not recognize how good this is? I love this. This blows my mind. This is my favorite kind of thing. And I love this shit. Mind-blowing stuff. Friggin' love it. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk about how a lot of the other characters shine in this episode. And there's a lot of good comedy scenes and just great character moments for everyone. So with Major Kira, she's dealing with the Romulans, and Sisko is actually kind of the straight man throughout this episode. He plays off of Kira, plays off of Odo, where he says to Kira, Major Kira, make sure that you are able to be diplomatic. And Kira goes, I'm always diplomatic. And then they immediately cut to her with the Romulans going, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And while that gag doesn't always work for me, it works here. Nana Visitor sells it. I thought it was funny because Kira honestly is not known for her diplomacy. That's a very accurate character trait and very accurate of Sisko to point out, well, you're not always so diplomatic. And she's like, I'm always diplomatic. And then we jump to the proof that she is not. And the Romulans are being assholes. But here's another interesting thing, getting away from the comedy for a second. How early did they foreshadow Kira and Odo's relationship, romance? Because that's what the Romulans are kind of accusing her of. And then she has this exchange with Odo later and like, oh, that's just ridiculous. And Odo's like, oh yeah, totally ridiculous. But you can tell right then that they have a thing. And this is way back in season 3, and the romance doesn't even start till season 6. And what I love about this is that they do not beat you over the head with it for 3 seasons until it's the point where it's like, come on, get together already. It's not like that at all. It's just very subtle and occasional hints at their relationship. And it's interesting to see it all the way back here in season 3 when we don't actually get to fruition of it until season 6. So that is interesting for me to watch. Now, Odo has a couple of great lines, and he's explaining to Sisko about how he came to the conclusion that he came to. He's like, well, my cousin works for Starfleet Command, and or not his cousin, but I know a friend who has a cousin who works for Starfleet Command. And Sisko is just like, is there a point to this? He's like, I just wanted to remind you how good I am. So it just seems like out of nowhere that they would have that kind of comedy in here, but I love it. And then Odo has my favorite line, one of my favorite Odo lines ever, where Cisco is asking him, how he's going about his investigation, and he's like, I'm investigating the Klingon ambassador, the Romulan ambassador, so and so and so, Quark, so and so. It's like, you think Quark had something to do with this? And Odo just gives him this puzzled look, like, I always investigate Quark. I mean, of course. And you know what? That's a sound strategy, because Quark may not always be directly involved in something, but he usually has his hands dirty, because usually he's out to try to make some profit, and doing so gets wrapped up with some shady characters, and oftentimes is indirectly related to something nefarious that's happening on the station, and investigating him could lead Odo a lot of times to the answer, although that is not the case here. But it often is. So I think that's a really sound strategy, and that's part of why I think that line is so funny. And then Bashir, after the scene that I mentioned earlier, where he, future Bashir, tells Brian to go back and do this scan, and then Bashir, who am I to argue with me? I don't know, his delivery really works for me, and that is, of course, the name that I chose for this, screen name that I chose for this, because I really love that line. We also have Quark being typical Quark, asking Brian to peek into the future and see the Davo table for him, and I love how Brian pays that off at the end and goes up to Quark and says, "Hey, Quark, Dabo," like right before it happens. And see Quark's look on the look on Quark's face. Love that. Love all of that. I think the Romulans are good villains in this episode. I've heard complaints about the Romulans in this episode. I wish they were used more often in Deep Space Nine, and how they're scheming and nefarious in this episode. And we get the follow up to the beginning of season 3, finally, where they had made this bargain with the Romulans to lend the Romulans will lend them a cloaking device in exchange for intel. So this is finally the follow up to that, and goes pretty much exactly how it should, with the Romulans being sneaky and underhanded as they are wont to do. So for all of those reasons, for the time travel, for the ensemble cast, for the comedy, for the character moments, this episode to me is in my top 10, regardless of what anyone else thinks of it. So Visionary is my number 10. Now we can move forward in my top 10 and move up to my number 9.
Number 9? Number 9? Number 9?
Okay, moving on in my top 10 with my number 9. Again, number 9 out of nearly 700 episodes. This is a big deal, people. It comes from Star Trek The Next Generation. From the 6th season, the great 6th season of Star Trek The Next Generation. Ship in a Bottle. Ship in a Bottle is my number 9. This has one of the most mind-bending twists in television history, in my opinion, and one of the best villains in all of Star Trek. So I'll start with the twist. There's actually 2 separate twists in this episode. It's a very twisty, turny episode, which does not always work for me. I think more often than not, twisty episodes or movies don't work because they're trying too hard. But these work spectacularly well. They're very effective. And I'll talk a little bit about why in just a second. But the first twist is that our characters have never left the holodeck. And this twist stands the test of time. So even though I've seen it God knows how many times, like a gazillion times, and I know what the twist is, no matter how many times I watch this, the characters still don't know what the twist is, because for them it's like a time loop. It's time loop resets. They go back to the beginning of the episode when I start watching it again, and they don't know what the twist is. So it's fun to play along and watch the characters discover it. Every single time I've seen this episode, it's still fun to watch them figure it out and watch them be blown away. Just see the dismay on Picard's face and his tone of his voice when he asked Data, Mr. Data, who is real here? And that's actually was a really good question the first couple times I saw this episode, because I wasn't sure it was real there either. I was like, had to remember, wait, what, is Geordi real? Because I think honestly when I first saw it, I thought maybe Geordi was real. I couldn't remember who went into the holodeck, so I'm glad they had that in there to kind of spell it out a little bit, where Data explains, you and I are real, Barclay is real, we all went in the holodeck together, but everyone else is fake. And did they use a little bit of a plot convenience thing to have the left-handed thing that they set up at the beginning of the episode? Maybe, but I thought it worked really well. I also love it because I'm still able to put my mindset, put myself back into the mindset, I should say, of the characters, and as if I had first watched it. I'm still able to put myself into the mindset of when I first watched it, what I felt, what I thought. And no matter how many times I watch this, I'm still able to do this. So when Data says, I figured out how Moriarty was able to leave the holodeck, I was like, you have? How? What in the world could have possibly led him to figure that out? Like, that seems out of nowhere. I don't get it. But then when he goes, I figured it, he says, I figured out how he left the holodeck, and he goes, he didn't, and neither did we. I was just like, what? Like, that was truly one of the most mind-blowing twists I've ever seen. To this day, it still is, and I still get chills whenever that reveal comes on screen. Even though I've seen this like a gazillion trillion times, I still get a little bit of chills up and down my spine when that reveal is made. And then once you have that reveal, you're able to look back, especially Neil having seen it many times, able to look back at Moriarty and see what a great villain he is, because just how delightfully evil, manipulative he is. Because you're able to look back and see how deliberate every word he says is, and how it's designed to mislead while playing at being this innocent victim and nice guy. But he's so manipulative, and it's so fun to go back and watch it after you know what the reveal is, which I obviously did after the first time I watched it. So every subsequent viewing, I'm able to look at Moriarty and go, man, what a manipulative bastard, with every word that he says to Picard. And Picard falls for it, and I don't think Picard is dumb for doing so. I think Moriarty is really smart, although of course Picard gets the better of him at the end, when that's of course the next twist, which by the way, before I get into that, I did just want to mention Moriarty, one of the greatest villains in all of Star Trek, and I am glad they didn't ruin him too much in Picard season 3, because I'm glad that he didn't turn out to be the actual Moriarty. Personally, I could have done without him. I think it was just very fan servicey, like just throwing a version of Moriarty in there. Like, I don't think we needed that. But thankfully, at least they didn't ruin this whole thing by having Moriarty inexplicably return, because that wasn't the actual Moriarty. It was a different version of him. But in any case, so we get this other twist where Picard is able to turn the tables on Moriarty, and it's another one that I bought the first time I saw it. I'm like, oh, he got out? How does he get out? How does this happen? But we get the twist that Picard did to Moriarty what he had done to him, and it was also a simulation. And then we have a mind-blowing part at the end, which I'll get to in a second. But I do have to kind of point out the you know, it's one of those things like you shouldn't try to think too hard about. Although after watching it a million times, I do think a little hard on it sometimes. But you shouldn't. You just gotta let it go. But like, how exactly did Moriarty program the holodeck to create this fake enterprise in the first place without Picard knowing? And then how, especially, was Picard able to do the same thing without Moriarty knowing? Feels like, especially in that case, Moriarty would be aware, he would be monitoring the arch or whatever, that he wouldn't be able to get away with it. But whatever. Don't think too hard on it. It works. I love it. Another great twist. And then, of course, we get the ending where it ends up being in this little cube, and they put in a little thing to make it keep running, and it's on Picard's desk, and then Picard has that line. It was like, for all we know, maybe we are a simulation sitting on someone else's desk. And I'm like, stop it, Picard! Stop it! You're making my brain hurt. You're blowing my mind, man. Just stop it. Oh, so good. So good. And then at the end, Barclay says computer and program. And sometimes I watch this and I'm like, are we sure we're not going to be in holodeck here? Even though I know we're not. But it's just that twisty and that mind-blowy that even after seeing it a million times, I'm still like, are we sure? So that makes this a really effective episode. Now, I do have another just kind of funny nitpick that I want to mention, that I'm just being silly here and way overthinking it, and I recognize it. But a couple things. Okay, so when Picard first goes into the holodeck, he's wearing that weird, like, open jacket uniform that he started wearing in season 5 with the gray thing underneath, and he's got this open jacket. Now, maybe that is his regular uniform, that he can zip up and it becomes his regular uniform, but it doesn't look that way to me. To me, it always seemed like it was a different uniform. So if that is the case, if he starts off in the holodeck wearing a different uniform, so that means he went into his holographic quarters and changed into a holographic uniform and then continues to wear the holographic uniform outside of the holodeck. Again, I'm overthinking it, but it's a fun thing for me to think about. And now here I'm about to get really ridiculous here. I was just thinking, like, they were in there for several hours. Data's an android, but I sure hope neither Picard or Barclay needed to use the bathroom while they were in the holodeck. Now, bathrooms is something that Star Trek has largely ignored. It was finally brought up in an Enterprise episode, but usually they just kind of brush it aside, and it's not a thing that they talk about. But I just sure hope neither of them took a dump into a holographic toilet. Although I guess there is holodeck waste removal, as we've seen in Lower Deck, so maybe you can take dumps in holographic toilets. Now that I think about it, because there's holographic waste, there's a holodeck waste removal. So okay, maybe there's a thing that can happen. Okay, anyways, getting silly here. So let me end this on a serious note. One of the most mind-blowing, twisty episodes in all of Star Trek, with one of the best villains. I think he is easily a top 3 villain in all of Star Trek for me. Just how delightfully manipulative and evil that he is. Moriarty, of course, I'm talking about. This is absolutely my number 9 in my top 10. And now we're going to move further into my top 10 and talk about my number 8.
Number 8! Yay!
Okay, we are moving on up, and we have reached my number 8 in all of Star Trek. And my number 8 comes from the original series, And it is dun 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 dun. Mirror, Mirror from the second season of the original series. This is the episode that first introduced me to the concept of parallel universes, which is a concept in sci-fi that I have been fascinated with ever since. This is the ultimate parallel universe episode of Star Trek. Now, I say that, and yet, oddly, I had Crossover, which was the Deep Space Nine sequel, which was back at number 16 on this list, as my number one and my top 10 parallel universe episodes. Because I do think if you're looking at it just as a parallel universe episode, I actually think Crossover makes a lot of improvements. They have a character meet themselves. They have more complexity where it's not just everybody in the mirror universe is evil and everyone in our universe is good, but we have the Empire being overthrown, and now you have some empathy toward the humans who have now become slaves, and the tables have turned, so it introduces more nuance and complexity. And therefore, I think you've got to call it objectively the better episode, and yet nostalgia. Nostalgia. This is one that I first saw when I was a wee lass. I was a young little kid, and I was just blown away by this concept, and that just sticks with me. And I still get chills down my spine, and I believe I said this for the last episode too, but this is true of a lot of the episodes in my top 10 that they have moments that just stick with me. I still get chills when I first see them come off the transporter and you hear that music, da 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 da, and they do the kind of Nazi-esque Empire, except they go like this. This is different than the Nazi symbol. But definitely, you feel like you're an evil empire, and you got Spock with beard, and he's being cruel to poor Mr. Kyle. Oh, no, Mrs. Spock, no! That whole sequence still gives me chills. And then the next sequence after the commercial break, when they're going da na 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 na, da-da, like the slow version of the song, and they're walking around and everybody's in the hallway going like this, and Kirk hesitantly goes, I guess we go like this too, and everybody is like, Captain, what's going on? He's like, not now. Still to this day, that all of that, when we're first thrown into this mirror universe, no matter how many times I've seen this episode, and no matter how many times I've seen all the sequels to this, all the other episodes set in the mirror universe, and all the other Trek shows, these moments, they still get me. And that music that I keep humming there, it's been used in many Star Trek episodes, and I'm sure that other people might have stronger associations with that music and other episodes, but for me personally, this is the mirror music. And feel free to say in the comments what episodes this music reminds you of, because I know it is used well in other episodes, but in this one, it's used in that what the fuck moment, but then it's just kind of used in different forms all throughout the episode. There's the slower version, as I said, when they're walking in the hallways trying to figure out what's going on. I love that so much. Just throughout, there's even the love version of that is like a different variation of it when we meet Marlena later in the episode, and it just works so well for me. I just love how they use that particular theme all throughout this episode. the different versions of it. So to me, that music is Mirror Mirror. I'm sure other people have other associations with that music because it is used a lot in Star Trek. Now, of course, there's the parallel universe aspect of it. There is the chillingness of seeing our known characters act completely evil, seeing the evil smile on Chekhov, seeing how the characters interact with each other, how they're trying to gain rank by assassinating each other. That is all just very chilling. But another aspect of this episode that I will always love, and this is true of a lot of my favorite original series episodes, is the ensemble and the use of characters that don't always get a chance to shine. And I said this about the last original series episode that appeared in my top 100. That was back in number 17 with The Naked Time. Uhura really gets to shine. And so anytime they really allow Uhura to shine, I'm probably going to like that episode most of the time. And both in The Naked Time and in this episode, Uhura gets a badass moment. And in both cases, Sulu is the victim of her badassery, which is kind of funny. Although in this case, it's not Prime Sulu, it's Mirror Universe Sulu, but still. It's always Sulu who is on the other end of her badassery. Now, of course, is it a little bit of a plot contrivance that they have to distract Sulu because this little beepy thing is going to come up on a security panel? Yes, it is, but I love this scene so much. One of my favorite scenes ever, so I don't mind it. This is where Uhura turns the tables on Sulu and like fucks with him and pretends to be interested and goes, and she's just like very sexy about it and goes, "You don't remember how the game is played. I decline and you come back. You didn't come back." And Sulu's like, "Oh, now we're talking." He's so awkward and like and unappealing. And then the little beepy thing comes on, and she goes, "Oh, I'm afraid I've changed my mind again." This is so badass. And then he goes, "You take a lot of chances, Lieutenant." And she draws a knife on him and says, "So do you, mister. So do you." Like, I love Uhura. There's also another couple horror and Kirk moments. I mentioned that in The Naked Time as well, where Uhura at one point is hesitant and says, "Captain," and he grabs her and he says, "Uhura, you can do this. You're the only one who can do this." So that's Captain Kirk showing faith in Uhura, and I love that. Now, do I have a little bit of a problem with, Uhura being portrayed as the weak and frail woman? Like, "Oh, Captain, I don't know what to do." A little bit. That's such a 1960s portrayal of women. But she makes up for it with that badass scene later. So I more get focus on that connection that Kirk and Uhura have in that moment where Kirk believes in her and says, "You're the only one who can do this." So that I very much appreciate. Now, with the characters, I do have kind of a nitpick, but it's not a nitpick toward this episode particularly. It's a Star Trek in general nitpick because every Star Trek show has done this. I think the original series is probably the worst offender of it, but we do get these great character moments with Uhura and with Scotty, and of course McCoy and Kirk. But just as with pretty much every Star Trek show ever, the contents of the away team or the landing party, as they're referred to in the original series, don't really make a ton of sense for the mission. I mean, and again, not just this episode, not just the series. This is all of Star Trek does this constantly. So they're going down to do negotiations with this race who have the lithium crystal mines, and they want to negotiate being able to mine some of their dilithium. And so to do this, they send down the captain, the chief medical officer, obvious choice for negotiations, and the chief engineer, because you need engineering done by your top engineer, not even like a secondary engineer, but your top engineer, and your chief communications officer go down for this mission. So I just have to point that out. Doesn't bother me. Not a flaw for this episode because it's all of Star Trek. In fact, I mentioned this as well in Crossover, the sequel in Deep Space Nine, because why are Kira and Bashir in a shuttlecraft together in the Gamma Quadrant makes zero sense, but they wanted Kira to be the main character and Nana Visitor to play two different versions of herself, and they wanted Bashir to be there to have those interactions with the mirror universe of Brian. So that's why. So that's the answer to why these characters go to these away missions is for plot. But that's okay because that's Star Trek. I just enjoy pointing it out because it's fun. Now, of course, with characters, I can't leave out Spock and how they did a mirror universe version of him. Of course, he has to have the beard. I think McCoy was right. He does look better in the beard. I'm not going to lie. But I found that to be very fascinating as well. Now, of course, later iterations of Trek kind of, I don't know how it all fits because they show the Vulcans are kind of slaves. But I guess by the time we get to this point, which is only 10 years after Discovery, but apparently in the mirror universe, some Vulcans at least are able to join the Empire. But, whatever. That's more for the other shows to figure out, not for this episode. So, another couple nitpicks that I like to enjoy. Again, still number eight. So these nitpicks do not hold back the episode. It's more like, this show was made in the 60s and it's fun for me to kind of poke fun at it. Kirk hits Spock on the head with a vase, and then McCoy goes, "He's gonna die if we don't get him on this table." Really? In the 23rd century, someone getting hit on the head with a vase is enough to almost kill them. Yeah, that was definitely plot convenient, but it worked for the plot, so whatever. And then Marlena uses the device to kill off all of Sulu's henchmen. And Sulu looks around and he's like, all his henchmen disappear. And then Sulu is left standing there alone. She closes the door on the device. It does not kill Sulu. Why would she not? Because he's a main character. Even though this is a mirror universe version of the main character, this is the original series. Even the mirror universe versions of our characters have plot armor. So, Deep Space Nine was not afraid to do that. They killed off mirror universe Odo in the first one, and they kill off plenty of other mirror universe counterparts. But here they don't want to do it for our main characters. So she inexplicably leaves Sulu alive. But Kirk takes him in anyway, so it all works out. Anyway, those are just my fun nitpicks. This is still one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek for me. It's all the way up on my number 8. It's what got me into parallel universes. And once again, love the ensemble cast here. I never get tired of this episode. I've seen it. I think it's fair to say that 200 is probably not too high of a number as far as the number of times I've seen this in my life. Probably even more than that. Maybe even up to 300, 400, 500. I don't know. And I never get tired of it. And that to me is a sign of a truly great episode. And that's why it makes my top 10. And now we're going to move up even higher in the top 10. We've got 2 entries left in this video. We're moving up to number 7.
Number 7.
All right, let's move on to my number 7, and you see my screen name right there, so you already know what this episode is, so I'm going to jump right to it. My number 7, of course, comes from Star Trek Voyager. It is Year of Hell, Parts 1 and 2 from the 4th season of Star Trek Voyager. Now, this is kind of the pinnacle of what I've been talking about with Voyager all throughout my top 100. I've said it again and again. That my opinion on Voyager is that it squandered a lot of potential, and that I felt that things were too neat and clean for a ship that was separated from their main source of everything, separated from their home, that everything would be so squeaky clean. Then Chakotay and the Maquis would switch over so easily, and that the ship is not totally falling apart. And when it does fall apart, like all of a sudden, it's just magically pristine again. And the next episode, that there should have been more hardship. And things can get better again. I'm not saying that I want it to be completely dark and for the entire series to be the year of hell, but I think there should have been periods of time where they went through this, and then then things get brighter again for them. So there perhaps should have been a period of time where the ship does get this fucked up, but then they meet a friendly alien species who is willing to help them out and fixes the ship up a little bit, and then as they go along, the ship gets fixed up a little bit more and a little bit more, and then maybe you have these different weird alien pieces on the bridge that weren't there before, so it's this like bridge pieced together. That would have been interesting. But since we did not get that, what we do get is a pair of episodes that truly showcase what Voyager could have been. And yes, it all gets undone at the end. It's just an alternate timeline. But as you'll see in other parts of my top 10, particularly in the top 5 that's coming in the next couple months here, I don't mind alternate timelines being reset. Especially when the alternate timeline in and of itself is intriguing, has interesting characters, interesting stories, interesting character interactions. Then, yeah, I didn't get this story in Voyager itself. I'm happy to take an alternate timeline version of it that lasts for 2 episodes, because I just want to see how the crew would really deal with hardship. I want to see Janeway refusing at first to abandon ship and separate the crew, and then at the end of part 1 having to give that speech and reconcile the fact that she does have to let at least most of the crew go and go off and do their own thing. And I love that ending. This isn't a cliffhanger, like one we'll get to in the top 5 again. This isn't a cliffhanger, but I love the ending where it's like all the like little escape pods going off. Oh my god, this is so good. Now things do get pretty bad. Like the ship gets to unfixable conditions, and Tuvok gets blind and all those things. So I don't know that I would have wanted it to be that extreme necessarily in the show itself. But it's okay to do that stuff in an alternate timeline thing. You can kind of do whatever you want. Also, I'm interested in this concept, this timey-wimey concept. I love good timey-wimey episodes. And this concept of these, the species that goes around and just defeats their enemies by erasing them from history, that is really interesting. And at the beginning of this episode, toward the beginning of this episode, they demonstrate this so well by... I love this so much, where Janeway is having negotiations with, what were they called? They're erased from history, so who knows? Of course, eventually they're restored, but that the dude who kind of looked like the Cardassian a little bit, reminded me of the Cardassian from the episode where Kira gets turned into a Cardassian. Anyways, like I don't know if it was the same actor or not, but the dude who reminds me of the Cardassians a little bit, where they're having a relationship with them, and then the Crema are really upset and by this, and like you're fraternizing with our enemies, and Janeway's like, "We got your piddly little ship. We're not afraid of you." And then the shockwave comes, and that dude, Cardassian-looking dude, vanishes, and all of a sudden the ship is much bigger, and now they're being threatened. It's so good. I love these timeline change scenes when they're done well in Star Trek, and that was one of the top ones for me. And then I should also talk about Anorax, played by Brett Foreman from the Hot 70s show. And he, too, like Moriarty, is one of the top villains in Star Trek. Because he is kind of like an anti-hero. He's like the flawed hero, the flawed villain. He's an anti-hero. And so much so that Chakotay actually kind of falls for his charms a little bit and wants to believe that, he's misguided, but he's not a bad person. Whereas Tom Paris is like, hey, have you seen what a maniac this guy is yet? Have you seen enough? Can't argue with Tom Paris there, but I also kind of see how Chakotay was kind of taken in by his charms. And that speaks a lot for this character, that he is so much more complex than the typical villain. And the irony of all of this is he's going through all of this trouble erasing all of these species from history. Turns out he just destroyed his time machine thingy, and then he would have reset everything. And he doesn't even realize it. I think his goal was for him to still have all those memories, but that's not what happened. Everything is reset. I'm assuming the scene that we see at the end with his wife, that would be a couple hundred years earlier, because they had been doing this for a couple hundred years, I think. But that also is very fascinating. That whole concept was very fascinating. But anyway, Anorax, one of the top villains in Star Trek, really complex and interesting as a character. And of course, we end this with the great one-liner. It's so cheesy, but it's so good. Janeway goes, "Time's up," and crashes into the ship, sacrificing herself, but not really, because now the timeline resets. And it's such a great ending. Yes, I would have preferred if they did this for the whole fourth season, which is what one of the producers, I can never remember who was who, one of them wanted to do that, have the whole fourth season be this. I think he could have done it and not reset the timeline. And as I said, like when they get to the end, maybe the ship is pretty fucked up, but you go find an alien species who's friendly, who helps build the ship up a little bit. Later on, you find another one. Maybe you can exchange some things with them, do a little trade. They help fix up the ship a little bit more, and then the ship never gets back to how pristine it was before, but they fix it up a little bit at a time. So it's not always the whole show is just like the ship is falling apart or anything like that. That's what I would have preferred. But failing that, I will take this amazing pair of timey-wimey alternate timeline episodes with one of the best villains in Star Trek. So I'll take it. I'll take it so much that it lands all the way up at my number 7 out of 700. Number 7. All right. We're moving on to number 6, but we're not going far because we're staying in Star Trek Voyager. So here we are to close out this video, number 6.
Number 6.
All right, let's close off this video with my number 6 from Star Trek Voyager, Scorpion Parts 1 and 2. So numbers 7 and 6 are great Voyager two-parters. This one taking place a little bit before the last one I just talked about. This is the season 3 finale and the season 4 premiere, much like another certain Star Trek show, having the big Borg cliffhanger in between seasons 3 and 4. And while this one was not the level of a cliffhanger that one was, this one has an incredibly intriguing story involving the Borg, bar none the best Borg episodes that they would ever do in Voyager. It only goes downhill from here. As soon as they bring the Borg Queen in, that shark is jumped. The Borg Queen coming in is jumping the shark, and they would try to undo some of the great things that they did in this episode, as I'll talk about a little bit. But this episode proves you don't need the Borg Queen to make a great Borg episode. So let's talk about the beginning of this episode first, because what an opening scene! What a cold open, where you have these Borg cubes, and they're the Borg are doing their thing. We are the Borg. Resistance is futile, and then you just see some unknown ship firing a weapon at them and just completely obliterating them. That's a hook, baby. That'll hook you in. You're like, whoa, what the fuck? That, I believe my brother did as like a top 10 cold opens, if I remember correctly, and I think that was on there because that's a pretty great one. That is one of the best hooks in Star Trek. You're like, what is going on? Now we get the introduction gradually of species 8472, and introduced as an enemy that is more powerful than the Borg, and you buy it. You can buy it. It's not. I remember when I first saw this, I was a little like, really, an enemy more powerful than the Borg? Like, it was very easy for them to screw this up and just have some lame ass enemy that's just there for plot convenience. Like, oh, they're more powerful than the Borg, but they're not really. But these dudes were scary. The way that they would telepathically communicate with Cass and say things like the weak must perish, and Cass just being really freaked out by her communications with them, and you don't actually get to hear them talk. They just communicate telepathically and look scary. Nowadays, that CGI does not look, the effects do not look amazing, but at the time, it was normal for the time, and they were fucking scary. They were scary, and you could buy that this was a real threat. Not only are they more powerful than the Borg, but they want to eliminate all life. They want to conquer. They're saying the weak will perish. That immediately sets the stakes, brings you into the story, and like, oh my God, how are they going to get out of this? This is incredible. Now, one of the ways that the show would later try to undercut this episode is by retconning species 8472 into these beings that can take human form and recreate Starfleet Academy, and claim that they were the victims the whole time, and they were afraid of Starfleet, and they're worried Starfleet's going to attack them. That is such bullshit. When you watch this episode, they were so clearly this aggressive species. Now, it does get revealed by the end of this two-parter that, yes, the Borg attacked them first. But once that happened, they were intent on conquering the other galaxy. They were taking advantage of that. So to say that they were afraid of Starfleet in that 5th season episode. That was total bullshit, because it is so abundantly clear when you watch this episode that they are an aggressive species, that they basically are supremacists. Like, they see themselves as superior. That is so clear. So the bullshit episode, I just hate how they tried to retcon that later. But in any case, all of that makes the stakes real, and that leads to, I think, the best first officer and captain debate in Star Trek history. If I were to do a top 3, I think Chakotay and Janeway probably have 2 of them, and I would put the Archer and T'Pol one from Damage, which was earlier in my top 25, probably in there as well. But and I say that because neither one of them are truly right and neither one of them are truly wrong, but they're having this debate under really dire circumstances. And it starts with Chakotay telling the Scorpion story, and that was, of course, the most memorable part of that exchange. But then he goes further, and Janeway accusing Chakotay of not trusting her or pleading for his trust. Like, you've got to trust me, and Chakotay saying, it's not that I don't trust you, I just think that this is wrong. And Chakotay rightfully pointing out that Janeway is not a person who can let things go. And I think we've seen this several times in the series up to this point, and then after this point, that Janeway does not quit. And sometimes maybe she does need to let things go. And Chakotay is making the case that this is one of those times where maybe we should call it quits here. And he makes a really good argument. And it's hard to argue against a lot of what he says. He's not wrong. And yet, hard to argue against a lot of what Janeway says as well. So that whole exchange, starting with the Scorpion story and going beyond that whole scene is the best Captain First Officer debate in Star Trek. And I say this a lot when I do my Voyager reviews. It's a shame that they weren't able to maintain this, because this all falls apart in later seasons where we kind of lose a bit of that relationship, and we end up with the Doctor and 7 of 9 show by season 7. But we can still look back and appreciate how great this scene was. And then, of course, we get the introduction of 7 of 9, and it's always really interesting for me to go back and watch this episode again. And now, having watched 4 seasons of 7 of 9 as a member of the crew, and how she's first introduced, and how she is so Borg, and how she has the line over here a couple times where Tuvok or Janeway will make a statement, and she'll go, "We are Borg," and Tuvok's like, "Indeed," and those words like kind of say it all. Like it totally explains all of her actions. And that's why you don't need the Borg Queen, because the interactions between 7 and 9 as a Borg and Janeway throughout this is so much better than any interactions that the Borg Queen has with Janeway, because they're real. There's a real exchange between 2 characters, and not this cartoony, melodramatic bullshit that you get with the Borg Queen. And even here, Janeway's trying to appeal to her humanity, something that, of course, she would continue to do onward. And this is another thing they try to ruin later. They try to retcon it and say that the Borg Queen intentionally planted 7 of 9 on Voyager. You watch this episode and tell me that that's even at all possible. That would be the most convoluted plan in the history of time. Like, so many things would just have to happen to go right in order for that plan to work. And I don't buy this bullshit that the Borg Queen, has all these abilities of 3-dimensional chess or whatever, because if she did, she would never have been defeated. So I don't buy any of that bullshit. So I just think that it is one of the worst retcons in history. Then I also have got to talk about the resolution with the Janeway and Chakotay story, where they have this nice little scene where Janeway's like, we're never going to get anywhere if we don't work together. We need to be together. And Chakotay points out, 7 and 9 was right. She said this will be our undoing, like the fact that we each have our own individual opinions and we can't agree. And Janeway's like, well, we can have our own opinions and still maintain our individuality and still work together. And that's what they do. And I love the scene at the end when Janeway goes, Chakotay, Scorpion. I love that line. And he uses his nifty little trick that he learned a few episodes earlier where hooking up with those dudes. It's appealing to Seven's humanity, but mainly to distract her so that they can, shock her. And then that's it for 7-9, and she'll end up joining the crew after that. But great resolution to a great storyline, introducing these characters, this species that is more powerful than the Borg, that is super scary, and then having to have our crew work with the Borg and cooperate with the Borg. What an interesting concept. Like, who thought of this? This is such an interesting concept. This is the last really innovative thing that they did with the Borg, because as I said, it goes all downhill from here with cheesy mustache-twirly Borg Queen villains. But this was really an innovative way to bring the Borg back into the fold. It is too bad that they cannot keep this kind of innovation up moving forward, but that is irrelevant as the Borg would say, because these two episodes stand together as some of the all-time greats. Scorpion parts 1 and 2, which of course I count as 1, and it comes in at my number 6 in all of Star Trek. Okay, and that does it for this installment of my Star Trek Top 100. We have made it. We are all the way up into the top 10. We're now halfway through the top 10. So this is what's going to happen from here on out. The top 5 will be 5 episodes, obviously, but they're each going to have their own video dedicated to just that episode. And so I will be releasing my videos for number 5 and number 4 in the month of October, followed up in November by number 3 and number 2. And my video for my number 1 all-time favorite Star Trek episode out of all of them will be in December to close out the year. So there's also like another fun thing that I want to do with my top 5, and I will release another video in October or maybe at the end of September to kind of talk a little bit more about this concept. But I am going to create picture clues for each of the top 5, and I will release a video a few days before I release the actual video. So like for my number 5 coming in October, like a few days before I release my number 5, I'll release a picture clue video for my number 5. So it'll be this picture clue that like a brain teaser, like a puzzle that will reveal what my number 5 is, but you have to be able to figure out the picture clue. And I'll do another video in late September or early October, where I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about and kind of like walk you through it and explain what I'm doing, so that you're prepared. So I'll release the picture clue video a few days before I release the actual videos. That's coming up too. That's just kind of a fun thing that I want to do that's fun for me. So stay tuned for that. Also, please check out my weekly Lower Decks reviews, and you can also go back and watch my weekly Strange New Worlds reviews for season 2. So please subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you really soon. Goodbye, everybody.